You are paying for water your garden does not need. $50 to $150 a year on municipal water or well pump runtime every growing season for the rest of your gardening life. Add fertilizer. Add amendments. Add the hours with the hose every July evening when it hasn't rained in 9 days. That is a subscription. A subscription to a problem solved before your grandfather was born. A system exists that waters itself for 20 years, feeds itself for 20 years, warms itself through the last frost and past the first one in October. You build it once, you walk away. The plants handle the rest, because the soil handles the rest, because the thing underneath the soil is doing all the work. Hugelkultur, buried wood beds. Not a trend, a physics problem that Roman agriculture understood and tractor-scale farming forgot. The math is simple. You just have to see it once. Here is the first number. A dry log of rotting pine can absorb up to 500% of its own weight in water. Oak, 2 to 3 times its weight. That is not a metaphor. That is the physics of lignin, the polymer that holds wood cell walls together. As the wood decays, the lignin structure collapses into a sponge of microscopic pores, and fungal hyphae widen those channels as they feed. The result is a chamber that fills during rain and releases slowly to whatever roots are in contact with it. Measurements inside a mature hügel mound during July drought run between 40 and 60% volumetric soil moisture. A conventional raised bed in the same conditions runs 15 to 20%. That is not a marginal difference. That is the difference between a crop that needs daily irrigation and a crop that doesn't notice the dry spell. Density tells the same story. A fresh pine log has a density around 0.45 grams per cubic centimeter. After 7 years of decay inside a mound, that same log measures 0.18. More than half the original mass is now empty space, pore space, and most of that pore space fills with water the first time it rains hard. The log is not decomposing into nothing. It is decomposing into storage. The release mechanism is the part most people miss. Water does not sit inactive in the log. It moves. Fungal hyphae, the thread-like network that spreads through every gram of decaying wood, act as a pipeline system. They pull moisture from the wet log core toward drier soil on the outside of the mound. From there, plant roots take it through the same hyphal network, because most garden crops form associations with soil fungi and use those threads as extensions of their own root system. The log is the reservoir. The fungus is the plumbing. The plant is the customer. That is the full circuit. Nobody turns it on. Nobody maintains it. This is not a new idea. Columella, the Roman agronomist, described burying vine cuttings and brush in the base of terraced planting beds to retain moisture on dry hillsides. De re rustica, 1st century AD. The method has been stress-tested for 2,000 years. It did not need a channel. It needed someone to remember it. Now the second layer. The wood is not just storing water. It is running an engine. Decomposition is exothermic. Microbes breaking down cellulose and lignin release heat as a byproduct. The same reason a working compost pile steams in December. Inside an active hügel bed, that heat raises the root zone temperature by 3 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit compared to surrounding soil. In practical terms, that extends your growing season by 2 to 4 weeks on each end. Seeds germinate earlier in spring. Frost damage is lighter in fall. Root crops keep sizing up past the point where a normal bed has shut down for the winter. What this looks like on the ground in a zone 5 or 6 garden, tomato transplants go in 2 weeks before the neighborhood timeline because the soil is already at 55 degrees when surrounding beds are at 48. Fall lettuce keeps producing in the first week of November instead of shutting down in mid-October. A late broccoli planting that would freeze solid in an ordinary bed survives the first hard frost because the root zone is running 3 degrees warmer and the plant has a margin to recover. None of this is a miracle. It is stored microbial heat radiating up from a log pile 12 to 18 inches below the surface. And while the wood is heating the bed, it is also feeding it. Oak and maple take 15 to 20 years to decompose completely. During every one of those years, the wood releases a slow, steady trickle of nitrogen, phosphorus, calcium, and trace minerals into the surrounding soil. A bag of synthetic fertilizer lasts 1 season. A log lasts 2 decades. The release curve matters. Year 1 is light. The wood is still mostly intact, and most of the nutrient movement is into the microbial biomass, not the plant root zone. Year 2 through 5 is where the curve ramps. Year 5 through 12 is the plateau, stable, predictable nutrient flow that tracks the plant's demand because the same moisture that activates the microbes activates the release. When the bed is dry, decomposition slows. When it rains, decomposition resumes. The feed rate self-regulates. You do not calibrate it. The system does. Let me lay out the ROI. The average gardener spends between $150 and $250 a year on amendments, fertilizer, and supplemental water across a few working beds. 20 years at $200 a year is $4,000. A properly built hügel bed costs between $0 and $30 in materials because the inputs are logs, branches, and kitchen scraps, things most people burn, mulch, or throw away. The savings are not hypothetical. The bag of fertilizer lasts 1 season. The log lasts 2 decades. That is the whole comparison. One more comparison, because it lands harder than the dollar figure. A standard 40-pound bag of composted manure covers roughly 100 square feet for 1 season. The same volume of buried hardwood split across a 4x8 bed feeds that same footprint for 15 to 20 seasons. Same nitrogen, same phosphorus, same calcium. 1 decision against 20 purchases. You are not beating the fertilizer industry. You are just not paying the subscription. Here is how you build one. 7 steps in exact order, because the order matters more than the materials. Step 1. Pick a location with at least 6 hours of direct sun. Hügel mounds are passive systems. They do not make up for shade. Orient the long axis east to west if you can, so plants on both sides get light. Avoid placing the bed at the very bottom of a slope, where cold air pools and water collects. A slight elevation helps drainage at the base. Also, avoid the far corner of the yard, because once the bed is built, you will not be moving it, ever. A hügel bed with 2 feet of rotting hardwood underneath weighs about what a small car weighs. Build it where you want it in 10 years. Step 2. Get your logs. Hardwood is the goal. Oak, maple, beech, fruit wood from a windfall or tree trimming. Hardwood decomposes slowly, which means the bed runs for 15 to 20 years. Softwood works, pine, fir, poplar, but the bed is functionally done at 5 to 7 years instead. Do not use cedar. Do not use black walnut. Do not use anything treated with CCA or creosote. I will come back to why in a moment. Source locally. Arborists dump fresh hardwood logs for free almost every week during growing season. 1 phone call, a truck with space in the bed, and the materials cost of the entire project drops to 0. That is the realistic starting point. Step 3. Lay the logs in a trench or directly on the ground, your choice. The trench version settles less. Aim for a base layer roughly 2 feet wide and 1 to 2 feet thick. Pack the logs tight. Fill the gaps between them with smaller branches, twigs, and woody prunings. Air pockets are the enemy. They dry out and create cold spots. A rule that works in practice: if you can fit your forearm into a gap, fill it with smaller material. Step 4, and this is the one everyone skips: the green layer. Fresh grass clippings, aged manure, kitchen scraps, garden waste, coffee grounds, anything that is high in nitrogen. Pile 6 to 8 inches of it on top of the wood. This is not optional. If you skip it, the bed will underperform for 2 full seasons. I will explain why in the next block. If you have bagged manure available, 1 or 2 40-pound bags covers a 4x8 bed at the right depth. If you are using grass clippings, wet them as you pile them so they do not blow away. Step 5. 8 to 12 inches of topsoil over the green layer. Mix in finished compost if you have it. This is where the plants root the first year. Thinner than 8 inches, and root vegetables cannot size up. Thicker than 12, and the first-year plants are too far above the reservoir layer to benefit from it. Step 6. 3 to 4 inches of mulch on top. Straw, wood chips, leaves. This holds the surface moisture, while the lower layers charge up. A note most videos skip: do not use hay instead of straw. Hay contains weed seeds that will sprout and own your bed by midsummer. Straw is the stem. Hay is the stem plus the grain, plus everything else that was in the field. Get the difference right at step 6, and you save yourself about 40 hours of weeding over the next 2 summers. Step 7. Water it in deeply the first time. Then water normally for the first growing season only. By year 2, the wood core is holding enough moisture that you should cut back to roughly half of what a normal bed needs. By year 3, most climates can go hands-off except in extreme drought. One realistic sizing note: a useful hügel bed is at least 4 feet wide by 8 feet long and 2 to 3 feet tall at build time. It will settle to 1 to 1.5 feet within the first year as the air pockets compress and the wood begins to absorb water. That settlement is not a failure. That is the bed waking up. Now, the nitrogen trap. This is where most first-time hügel builders lose their first season, and almost all of them lose it for the same reason. Fresh wood has a carbon-to-nitrogen ratio around 400 to 1. Soil microbes need a C/N ratio closer to 24 to 1 to function. When you bury fresh wood and surround it with soil, the microbes immediately start pulling nitrogen out of that soil to balance their own ratio so they can feed on the carbon in the wood. The nitrogen leaves the root zone. Your plants yellow. Growth stalls. Leaves drop. 1 cubic yard of fresh wood chips can lock up 5 to 10 pounds of available nitrogen in the first year, enough to starve a small bed completely. The green layer fixes this. Nitrogen-rich material between the wood and the soil acts as a buffer. Microbes pull from the buffer, not from the root zone. Problem solved before it starts. Grass clippings carry a C/N around 15 to 1. Aged manure is closer to 20 to 1. Coffee grounds, 22 to 1. Layering any of these between the logs and the topsoil gives the microbes an easier meal than reaching up into the root zone. If you already built the bed and skipped the green layer, and this is a common rescue call, here is the fix. Top dress with 1 inch of finished compost. Scratch in about 2 tablespoons of blood meal per square yard and water deeply. You will see green come back in the leaves in 2 to 3 weeks. If the damage is worse, plants visibly stunted, not just pale, add a second round 2 weeks later. By the end of the first season, the wood surface has colonized with fungus. The C/N at the contact zone has dropped to something workable, and the bed transitions out of the trap on its own. Year 2 does not have this problem. The trap is strictly a year 1 phenomenon. The alternative is to use partially decomposed wood in the first place. logs that have already been lying in the woods for 2 or 3 years. Their C/N ratio has dropped closer to 100 to 1, and the trap is much smaller. A third of the first season nitrogen drain, sometimes less. If you have access to a woodlot or a neighbor with a brush pile that has been sitting for a couple of seasons, that is the material you want. Fresh logs still work, they just demand a heavier green buffer to compensate. Now the species question. Not every log is safe to bury. Get this wrong, and the bed is poisoned for years. Cedar, red cedar, white cedar, any of them. Cedar wood contains thujaplicins, natural fungicides that protect the living tree from decay. Buried, those compounds kill the soil microbes and fungal networks that are supposed to be eating the log. The bed sits there doing nothing, for years. 5-year-old cedar logs in a buried bed look almost identical to 5-day-old cedar logs. That is the compound working exactly as evolution designed it. You just do not want it working in your garden. Black walnut. Walnut wood, leaves, husks, and roots release juglone, a compound that is allelopathic to tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, and most of the Solanaceae family. The mechanism is straightforward. Juglone disrupts the enzymes that sensitive species use for cellular respiration. A single walnut log at the base of a hügel bed can suppress nightshade crops on that bed for a decade, because juglone is water-soluble and persists in soil for years. If you have a walnut on your property, burn the prunings. Do not bury them. Do not compost them. The compound survives composting. Treated lumber. CCA, chromated copper arsenate, was the standard pressure treatment chemistry until 2003 in the United States, and it is still in older fence posts, decks, and railroad ties. Arsenic, chromium, and copper leach out over time. You do not want them in your root vegetables. Even the newer ACQ and copper azole treatments, legal for residential use, are not approved for contact with food-growing soil. If the wood was pressure-treated, it does not go in the bed. If you are not sure, it does not go in the bed. Willow and poplar are a softer edge case. They are fine. They are not toxic. They just rot fast, 3 to 5 years instead of 15 to 20. Use them as filler branches, not as the structural logs, if you want the bed to run long-term. There is one unusual trait worth knowing. Cut willow logs can sometimes resprout after burial if the cambium layer is still alive. If you see green shoots pushing up through the mound in year 1, cut them off at the surface. The log has decided it is still a tree. A couple of seasons of this, and the shoots stop coming. The forest sorts all of this out on its own. Hardwoods pile up and decay slowly on the floor. Softwoods break down in one wet season. The allelopathic species stay separate. Walnuts create their own bare understory, and nothing competitive grows there. You are engineering what the forest does for free. That is worth saying twice. One thing I ran the numbers on once, tracking a single bed through its first 3 seasons. The input was about half a day of my time and roughly 6 wheelbarrow loads of free material from a neighbor's brush pile. The output by year 3 was enough tomatoes, squash, and beans to push my grocery spend on those 3 crops to 0 for the summer. Not a precision study, just a number I wrote down because I wanted to see it. Now, what the bed actually looks like on the calendar. Year 1 disappoints almost everyone. That is normal. Expect it. The wood core is still dry. The nitrogen is still rebalancing. The plants you put in the topsoil layer get maybe average performance, slightly worse than a conventional bed you just built and fertilized. Keep watering roughly as you would a normal bed. Do not panic. Most of the builders who quit hugelkultur quit in late summer of year 1, and they quit for a reason that fixes itself over the winter. What is happening underneath during year 1? The logs are absorbing their first full charge of water from autumn rain and spring melt. The mycelial network is establishing, strand by strand, connecting log to log and log to soil. The green layer is decomposing and releasing nitrogen to rebalance the C to N ratio at the contact zones. None of this shows on the surface. All of it is happening. Year 2. The wood has absorbed its first full charge of water. The fungal network is running, and the green layer has broken down into humus. You should feel the watering drop by about half. Yields come up to what you would expect from a healthy raised bed. The first year is paid back. Planting decisions open up. You can seed deeper-rooted crops like tomatoes, squash, and peppers directly over the wood core, because their roots can reach the reservoir layer now. Year 3 to 5. This is where the bed earns its reputation. The soil above the wood is dark, crumbly, full of worms. The top layer keeps rising because the organic matter is still working its way up. Tomatoes put down roots that reach the reservoir directly. Squash and cucumbers, plants that normally demand heavy irrigation, run on rainfall alone in most climates. Watering drops to near zero unless you hit a true multi-week drought. Side benefit: plants grown on a mature hügel bed tend to be noticeably more drought-stressed resistant than the same varieties grown in a conventional bed next to them. Same seeds, same weather, different soil underneath. That is the variable. Year 5 to 15. Peak performance. The bed is self-regulating. Organic matter has accumulated to 8 to 12 inches of topsoil, where you originally had 2 or 3. Earthworm density is high enough that you can see them surface after rain. Fertilizer is unnecessary. The only maintenance is mulching the top once a year and pulling weeds. The mound has probably settled to a broad, gentle slope, about 1 foot tall instead of the 3 you built it at, and that slope gives you planting microclimates. South-facing side warms first in spring and hosts tomatoes and peppers. North-facing side stays cooler longer and hosts lettuce, spinach, and brassicas into the heat of summer. One bed doing 2 jobs. Year 15 and beyond. The original wood has largely converted to humus. The bed is now essentially a deep raised bed with enormous organic matter content. It does not stop producing. It just stops being specifically a hügel. You can rebuild it at that point by digging a trench alongside and adding new logs, or just leave it and plant on top. The original investment is 20 years in the past. The output keeps running. Compare that to a conventional raised bed. $100 to $200 in lumber at build time. $50 to $150 a year in amendments, compost, and fertilizer after year 2. Rebuild the frame every 8 to 10 years when it rots. Same plants, same yields, higher ongoing cost, shorter useful life. The math is the math. One step this weekend. Walk the property. Find a 4x8 strip that gets full sun. Mark it. Start collecting logs from fallen limbs, tree trimmings, the neighbor's brush pile that they keep meaning to burn. You do not need to build the bed yet. Just start the pile. By the time it is tall enough, you will have done the hardest part of the work, getting the wood out of somewhere else and onto the spot where it is going to live for the next 20 years. Year 1 will not impress you. Year 3 will. Year 10, you will not be able to remember the last time you bought a bag of anything. That is what a reservoir buried 2 feet below your tomatoes looks like on a spreadsheet. The log is still working in the dark, 20 years after you stopped paying attention to it.